We meet Margaret, who is having a dream that she is caught in a dust storm and lost her daughters. She wakes up scared and goes and checks on her daughters who are sleeping in nearby room. It's the year 1933 where in Oklahoma, there is a dust storm and Margaret lives with her daughters. She has to regularly clean the house of dust, and her young daughter Ollie is deaf and mute. They all work together and take care of their farm, and their father is in Philadelphia for work. Margaret's youngest daughter, Ada, passed away due to having scarlet fever, and she is sad because of this. At night, they cover the windows, and Margaret tells her elder daughter, Rose, to lock the door behind her. Rose reads a horror story called Gray Man to Ollie, who uses dust storm to target people and kill them. Rose scares Ollie by saying Gray Man can come through any hole, and Margaret remembers her husband Henry. He asked them to come with him, but Margaret decided to stay close to Ada and now takes sleeping pills for sleep. Next day, they wear masks and go to their friend Esther's home, and Margaret notices her house is very dusty. Esther's son Thomas has severe cough, and the doctor told her it's because of dust, and they leave from there. Later, Margaret takes her pills but has violent dreams because of Ada and wakes up from her sleep. Next day, Margaret goes to a church where is a part of sewing group with other ladies, and they meet and talk. One lady says one of her friend's family has been attacked and killed by a drifter who no one saw. It was like the man disappeared in dust, and everyone hears some noise and gets scared. Later, Margaret meets Esther, who is planning to leave this place and go, but Margaret tells her no. She says the storm is too strong to leave, but Esther says she has to go for her children's health and leaves. Margaret rushes back home and closes all windows and doors, and Ollie sees someone in the dust. She gets scared and hides in the cupboard and tells Margaret that she saw a man outside. Margaret is also scared and ties a rope around her and goes outside to look and cannot find anyone. She comes to know Rose told her Gray Man story and scolds her and asks her to be careful in future. Margaret tells Ollie it's not real and then tells them a story when they used to grow a wheat crop. Everything was normal then, and she was happy. She keeps the book away and takes her pills. Next morning, Rose wakes her by saying someone is outside, and Margaret sees the cloth has been moved. She goes outside with her gun and sees blood on Barn's door and goes inside but finds a horse. Later, she sees an accident has happened and Esther's carriage has been destroyed and her elder son has died. They find Esther, who is still alive, and later Margaret cleans her home and other ladies ask Esther to be strong. Margaret is angry on her for not listening to her and tells her to be responsible for her other child. They bury the child, and Rose has nosebleed, so Margaret takes her to doctor, who checks her. He says it's because of dry air, and Margaret says Ada used to have these nosebleeds, and she is worried for Rose. She says even Esther's son was coughing badly, and the doctor advises her to buy masks and seal her home. Margaret goes home and seals all windows and shifts her daughter's bed in her room to keep them safe. She says she can seal only one room, and Rose worries about her and asks what will happen if she doesn't sleep again. Rose wants to go to town to her father, and Margaret says they will go next month when money comes. Next day at church, Margaret comes to know train services have been halted due to dust storm. She is worried she can't go to Henry, and there is no news on the drifter also, who killed the other family. Next day, she sees the cow in untied and shouts on Rose for not tying her and says the cow is keeping them alive with food. Ollie says it's Gray Man, but Margaret tells her not to think about him, and Margaret sees the cow is not giving milk. She hears some noise and sees her daughters are not there, but playing outside, and gets worried. She takes her daughters back to home, and Ollie says it was Gray Man who was making noise. They go back to barn with a gun and find a man, Wallace, hiding there in the floor, who comes out. He says Henry sent him here and asked him to check on his family and even gave him his jacket. Wallace says he got injured in storm and hurt his leg and decided to rest before meeting them. Margaret says Henry would have told him, but Wallace says all mail are delayed because of storm. Margaret doesn't believe him and asks him to go, and Wallace says he knows the cow is sick and can help them. Suddenly Rose's nose starts bleeding and Wallace says he can heal her but touching her as he is a healer. Margaret agrees and Wallace touches her face and falls down, and Rose is healed and bleeding stops. Margaret agrees to let him stay, and Wallace decides to help the cow by feeding her wet grass. She tells him she always has gun with her and asks him to stay and sleep in barn away from others. Wallace agrees, and later Rose asks Margaret if Wallace is a magician, and Margaret says she doesn't know. Margaret wakes and hears a noise and goes outside to see it's raining and her daughters are happy. She sees Wallace praying to Sky and believes he did this, and later at church they see Thomas is alone. He is carrying water himself, and Margaret goes to visit Esther and finds she is not well and sad. Margaret tells her to take care of Thomas and says it is tough to be normal after losing a child. She sees Esther has bed sores and comes out and informs the sheriff Bill that Esther isn't well. Bill decides to take Thomas with him to keep him safe, and Esther is not happy and cries for him. She is angry on Margaret and tells she has also become like her one day and suffer the way she is doing. Later Margaret meets Wallace and sees a cross he has in his book which belongs to his mother. He says he lost 2 of his sisters to scarlet fever, and Margaret says she also has lost her daughter Ada. Margaret says this caused her tremendous pain, and she even lost her mental state for a while. Henry says she will meet Ada in heaven one day, and Margaret says she has trouble sleeping also. Later they all do a prayer before having dinner, and Rose says she has received a letter from Henry. Margaret reads the letter and gives a sign to Rose, who goes and brings her gun, and they ask Wallace who is he. Henry mentions some healer stole his money and jacket, and one of his friends was found dead. Wallace says he just needed the money and a place to stay, and Margaret shows Ollie some hand sign. She shoots the gun, and Ollie runs towards her, and Margaret asks Wallace to leave from here. Wallace says he will leave once she gives him the letter, and says he helped her heal Rose and save her. He burns the letter and says he is Gray Man, and he will be back, and no seal can lock him out. Wallace leaves, and everyone is scared, and Margaret does not take her pills and decides to stay outside. She stands outside the house with her gun to protect it and sees Ollie is here, and Esther comes and kills her. She wakes up from her dream and sees it's morning and Rose is standing in front of her. She reads the book about Gray Man and sees there is more dust in the house than usual and feels scared. At night she decides to keep watch and hears some noise and hears her daughters crying for help. She sees their bed is on fire and uses water to put it out and feels Wallace has done something. Margaret believes he is Gray Man and came inside in spite of door being sealed, and she is scared. Rose says she gave Wallace the book to read and believes he has lied about being Gray Man. Margaret asks then how he cured her, and they hear a noise on door, and Margaret goes to open it. She sees Esther has come, and she apologizes for her past behavior and says she is healthy now. She wants to friends again with her, and Margaret invites her inside, and they knit together. Esther asks her to come to dance party tonight, and Margaret agrees to come as it will be a change for them. At night they get ready, and Rose says they should talk to Bill and inform him about Wallace. Margaret says no one will believe them without the letter, and Bill could take them both away from her. She feels they will think Margaret is going crazy and asks Rose not to mention anything to anyone. She hears a noise and goes outside and sees Rose choking, and she tears her dress to let her breathe. Rose says she was just laughing and says Margaret is overthinking things, and now her dress is ruined. Margaret cuts her leg and uses some blood as makeup, and they go to the party and see everyone is here. She feels all are talking about her, and Bill asks her for a dance and asks how is everything at home. Bill notices her leg is bleeding and informs Margaret about it, and she gets upset and says it's only a cut. They decide to leave the party, and Margaret sees Esther has come with Wallace at the party. Actually, she has come with some other person, and Margaret is confused and thinks she saw Wallace. Esther says she met a healer called Lee, and maybe he can help her, and Margaret notices something. Esther has the same cross necklace which Wallace had and tells everyone about Wallace. Margaret says Wallace was hiding in her barn and is troubling her since past few days, but one believes her. Rose says her mother is telling the truth, and Margaret says he is gray man who uses dust to go anywhere. Rose tries to stop her to say these things, and they decide to leave from there and come back home. Margaret feels everyone will think she is crazy, and Rose sees Margaret has used the needle on her hand. Margaret was not aware of this, and suddenly they hear a noise outside, and Margaret decides to go out. She goes with her gun and sees there is too much fog and hears many voices calling her name. She sees Wallace's shadow and shoots him, and Rose comes out to find her, but Margaret asks to go back inside and seal the room. Rose does this and later hears some footsteps outside the room and goes outside to see Margaret. She finds Margaret standing in a corner and scratching the wall and crying, and Margaret runs from there. Rose sees she has gone outside, and Margaret hallucinates that Rose is Wallace and readies her gun. She is about to shoot her, but Rose manages to wake her up and says she is sleepwalking again. Rose says there is no gray man and believes her mother started fire in her sleep and is acting weird. Margaret says she is just trying to protect them and says Wallace is doing all this and tells her not to worry. Margaret says she will do anything to protect them, and Rose is scared of her and runs inside the house. Margaret goes in but finds him missing, and Rose and Ollie have come outside through other door. Rose tells Ollie their mother has become gray man, and she finds Esther's body, which Margaret has killed. Rose gets scared and sees Margaret has Ollie with her and tries to stop her and goes inside the house. Margaret catches Rose and asks her to be quiet, and Ollie hears someone is at door and opens it. Bill has come to talk to Margaret, and Rose tells him she is not well, and Bill asks if she has seen Esther. Margaret lies, and Bill says he is taking the girls with him till Henry comes back, and Margaret cries. Bill tries to calm her, but Margaret takes a knife and stabs him, and he falls down and dies, and Rose and Ollie see this. They try to run out but see the storm is coming, and Rose picks the knife and asks Ollie to stay hidden. Margaret tells Rose they can be together in heaven and says they must die together as it's the only way. Rose is unable to kill her mom, and later Margaret uses her pills to mix them in food for all of them. Margaret mixes the pills in food, and Rose comes and tells her Ollie has gone outside. Margaret quickly goes outside and ties a rope to the door to find her back to the house. Rose goes and cuts the rope, so Margaret is lost in storm and knows her mother is not well. She cries and says sorry, and Margaret realizes her rope has been cut and tries to find her way back. She takes in the dust and dies, and wakes up in a wheat field and sees her daughters laughing. Later, Rose and Ollie have taken a train to meet their father in town and see the weather is becoming better and greenery is coming back.